On the 19th of September 2025, the Premier of Ontario drove to a village of about 1,200 people, stood in front of an ice cream plant, and handed the family that owns it $27 million of public money. Doug Ford ate an ice cream bar for the cameras, but walk your own freezer aisle for a second, and you'll see why a province would bother. Breyers and Ben and Jerry's answer to Unilever? In London. The Haagen-Dazs beside them is Fronery, built around Nestlé. Nearly every name in that aisle reports to a head office overseas. Chapman's is the one that stayed home, in Markdale, Ontario. And staying Canadian may be the riskiest bet it ever made. Most people file it under a warm little story about a family that beat the Giants. I read it the other way. Governments don't put that kind of money behind a company because it makes a good caramel. They do it because the company has become something a province decides it cannot afford to lose. And refusing to sell never made Chapman safer. It just moved all the risk onto one family in one small town. Now quietly, onto the rest of us. In 1973, a young couple named David and Penny Chapman left Toronto, where they had both worked at a dairy bar, and drove north to a town near Georgian Bay called Markdale. They bought the local creamery, an aging plant Penny would later describe as being in deplorable shape, and moved into the rooms above it. They spent close to a full year cleaning and fixing the place before they ever opened the doors. When they did, there were 4 employees, a couple of old trucks, and 15 flavors. And in those early days, the 2 of them did all of it. Mixed the ice cream, loaded the trucks, unloaded them, and drove out to knock on grocery doors. If you'd rather have the filings than the flag waving, subscribe, one company, pulled apart like this every week. They also made a quieter choice that mattered as much as the milk. They didn't open scoop shops or chase the summer highway trade the way most ice cream makers did back then. They bet everything on the grocery freezer, selling to the big chains quietly, 1 carton at a time. Money stayed tight for years. Late in the 70s, with the bills piling up, David Chapman walked into the local bank and asked to borrow $10,000. It was a short meeting. The manager decided a small-town ice cream company was too risky and turned him down flat. The Chapmans walked out and made a decision that shaped everything after. They would never borrow from a bank again. Hold on to that number, $10,000, because it comes back 50 years later in a way you won't see coming. That one refusal hardened into the whole identity of the company. No bank debt, no outside investors, no shareholders standing behind them asking for a return. And here's the idea to keep for the next 15 minutes. Because everything turns on it. Independence isn't safety. It's only a choice about who carries the risk when something goes wrong. For a long time, that choice looked like a quiet win. Chapman's grew into what the government, the press, and the company itself all call Canada's largest independent ice cream maker, turning out more than 200 kinds of frozen dessert and shipping them coast to coast. By 2009, it employed around 350 people in Markdale, a town of roughly 1,200, which made a single ice cream company the biggest employer in town by a wide margin. A company town is a strange thing to depend on, and Markdale didn't choose it so much as grow into it. The arena, the main street shops, the property tax base that paves the roads, a real share of all of it traces back to whether the freezers on the edge of town are running. Wherever you're watching from, this next part isn't really about ice cream. It's about what happens to a place when almost everything it has rides on one company that answers to one family. When you pour a whole town into a single operation, you also pour all of your risk into one place. And that fault line stayed invisible until the afternoon it split wide open. On the 4th of September, 2009, a welder's spark caught, and the plant the whole town leaned on burned in a matter of hours. Nobody was hurt. The building was very nearly a total loss, and when crews later picked through what was left, only about 5% of the equipment could be salvaged. One thing survived, and it turned out to be the thing that saved them. Across the site sat a low-temperature distribution center, about 150,000 square feet of it, packed to the ceiling with finished ice cream, roughly 3 months of stock. It bought the family the one resource a disaster usually takes away: time. They used it fast. David and Penny chose to rebuild in Markdale, on the same ground, instead of taking the insurance money and walking away, or moving the whole operation somewhere cheaper. That was a real decision, and an easy one to miss. After a fire like that, the move-in insurer's spreadsheet almost pushes you toward is to take the payout and rebuild wherever it's cheapest, or not rebuild at all. A company with no tie to a particular postal code goes where the incentives are best. Chapman stayed on the same ground and brought its people back, keeping a promise to the town that no contract anywhere required. Because insurance covered wages, all 350 or so employees kept getting paid by the company's own account. Not one missed a paycheck or a Christmas bonus. Within about 7 weeks, a temporary line was pressing out the first 2-liter brick. The permanent plant they named Phoenix. About 18 months later, it stood at more than 160,000 square feet, almost twice the size of the one that had burned. Here's the tell though: insurance paid the wages. Every other part of that gamble, the choice to rebuild bigger, to stay in Markdale, to carry a town for a year and a half, came down on one family and nobody else. The fire, it turns out, was only the dress rehearsal. The real bet came later. Quick question before the second half, and I actually want your answer. When you buy ice cream, do you ever turn the carton over to check who really owns the brand on the front? Tell me down in the comments, I read them, because not every Canadian dairy name made the Chapman's choice. Some reached the same fork in the road and took the money instead. The clearest example is Ault Foods, out of Toronto, for a long stretch the largest dairy processor in the entire country. In 1996, Ault sold its ice cream business to Nestlé Canada for $221 million. That one deal handed over the Seal Test parlor line and the Canadian license for Häagen-Dazs, all of it straight into Nestlé, the food giant headquartered in Vevey, Switzerland. On paper, the smart, responsible move: collect a very large check and walk away clean. The name didn't survive the sequel. Barely a year later, in 1997, an Italian company called Parmalat bought whatever was left of Ault outright for $415 million, and the Ault name simply switched off. A company that had run something like 15 plants across the country folded into a multinational's portfolio and wiped off the market. Its brands became line items on a foreign spreadsheet, run from a head office most of its former customers couldn't find on a map. So hold Ault up against Chapman's for a second. Ault took the safe exit, and the safe exit is the thing that ended it as an independent Canadian company. The shareholders were protected, the company itself was not. When the Chapmans turned that same exit down, the risk didn't go anywhere. It stayed entirely on their own table, every ounce of it. In 2025 came the biggest bet this family has ever placed. Chapman's announced an expansion worth more than $200 million, funded privately, straight out of its own pocket, a new 175,000 square foot facility in Markdale, 200 new jobs, and a provincial workforce climbing past 1,000 people. When it's finished, Chapman's is on track to become the largest single-site ice cream company in all of North America. And that is where the province walked in. Through an agency called Invest Ontario, Ontario agreed to back the expansion with a loan of up to $27 million. And the terms are about as soft as a loan gets. It's interest-free for 3 years, and about $4 million of it is forgivable outright, never repaid, as long as the family adds and holds on to those 200 jobs. The province isn't really lending against ice cream. It's paying, in part, for employment it cannot afford to lose. Because if Chapman's ever stopped being Chapman's, it wouldn't be one family's loss. It would be a hole in the map where a town used to have an economy. Now remember that $10,000 loan. Remember the rejection that made this family swear off bank debt for the rest of their lives. 50 years on, that same debt-shy family accepted a $27 million loan, not from a bank but from the public. The province of Ontario is now helping underwrite the bet without taking a single share of the company or a seat at its table. Public money riding on private risk. And that table is very small. This is how the man running the company describes it. Ashley Chapman, the founder's son, put it plainly. The board of directors here at Chapman's Ice Cream is my mother, my father, and myself. We don't have shareholders, and we can make these quick decisions. And essentially what it means is that the Chapman family will make less money. And that is fine if we can help out your average Canadian. It's a board he can poll by walking down the hall, and that's the advantage, right up until the moment it isn't. The same setup that lets them move faster than any multinational leaves nobody else on hand to absorb a loss when one finally lands. And in 2025, one did. When a new round of American tariffs pushed up the cost of the nuts and fruit Chapman's had long bought from U.S. suppliers, a public company in that spot raises its prices and protects the shareholders. Chapman's did the opposite. It froze retail prices for the rest of the year and swallowed the cost because, with no shareholders to answer to, the family were the only ones who could. In Ashley's own framing, the Chapman family would make less money, and that was fine. So add the whole thing up. One family, one town, one main plant, a board of 3 people, and now a public loan running alongside every bit of it. Every risk a large public company spreads thin across thousands of shareholders. Chapman's instead stacks onto 3 signatures in a single factory in Markdale. That is the BET the title promised you, and it is far bigger than the fire ever was. That $27 million check, it turns out, isn't a handout to an ice cream company. It's an insurance premium, paid by a province, on a bet a family made in 1973 and has refused to cash out of ever since. So where does it stand today? Chapman's is still privately held, still run by the same family out of Markdale, and still the largest independent ice cream maker in the country. There's been no sale, no foreign parent, and no outside shareholders. Verdict: still Canadian. But this was never the cozy survival story it looks like from the freezer door. Staying independent didn't make Chapman safe, and it never could. It only decided who would carry the risk, and today that means one family, one small town, and the taxpayers of Ontario, all of them bound to a single plant. There's no second one to point to. Chapman's is the last of its kind, and when something is the last of its kind, the people around it stop being able to treat it as ordinary. They start paying to keep it. That instinct usually arrives dressed up as something warmer: heritage, national pride, supporting local. Underneath the language, it's a country noticing it has one of something left and deciding it would rather quietly pay to keep it than learn what the map looks like without it. Unlike Ault's old brands, there's no foreign owner I can hand you here, and no rival that took the safe exit and somehow stayed itself on the other side. The safe exit, the one Ault chose, is the very thing that ends the company. There's a lesson tucked in there for anything with a maple leaf printed on the box. Check who signs the checks and who eats the loss. The flag on the carton tells you who to cheer for, never who is actually carrying the weight. If this is the kind of thing you'd watch again, subscribe. It's the whole reason a channel like this can keep pulling the files. There are other companies on my list that stood at the same fork and took the check instead. I'll get to them. Until then, stay curious about who really owns it.